The following is a presentation of Castleview Baptist Church in Indianapolis, Indiana.
I saved the mother-in-law ones to a little bit further in because we want to warm up the crowd. So, are you just going to volunteer? Who's going to answer, or are you all going to answer? Okay, we don't know. All right. This one's fairly simple, maybe. What is one thing you do in marriage to show your spouse that you love them? And the assumption is that you love your spouse. Don't all jump out at once.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Text back.
Apparently not, yeah. One thing I do to show Jess that I love her, try to help out in the evenings with the kids and try to not leave her to that on her own. It's pretty basic.
I'm going to throw some of you fathers under the bus. I'm really sorry about that. But Nathan gets up with the kids at night every time, except the baby. So, and that's a lot of time. We have 5 children, for those of you who don't know, so he doesn't really sleep.
Now, how do you show him? Yeah. She lets him. That's wisdom right there. I like that.
I think something as simple as I take an interest in his work and ministry. I love asking him about what he's teaching on or how things are going. So that's one way that I show him I love him.
Anybody else on the panel?
Flats.
He's showing you he loves you.
He loves apple pie and ice cream.
Amen.
All right.
I do that.
I show her I love her by just being me.
You're a gift. I love that. Hey, all right.
I try to, we kind of did a thing most every year where I would encourage her to get away by herself. She hiked the Appalachian Trail without me, and well, I like to tell people that. And so, but we worked at doing that.
Go ahead.
Cookie dough.
Yes.
I already told that to the ladies.
Yes.
And some other things, but
Nice.
mostly cookie dough.
Yes. She likes it when I compliment her eyeshadow. She likes to get feedback in the eyeshadow. A lot. It's true.
Excellent.
It's true. Yeah.
We don't consistently pray as a couple. What does that look like? What is a good way to start? Any examples from couples that do this well? So how do we consistently pray as a couple? What's worked, what hasn't?
Are we starting and going down?
Anywhere.
It doesn't have to be all of us. You two are good enough. These 2 couples.
Well, it's obviously easier when the kids are gone. So we pray together after dinner now. And it's good to we also memorize scripture together at that time. And it's good to have a kind of a list. So we decided we have 5 children, one a day, you know. Yeah, and their families. So it's good to have a list. And it's easy to be consistent when you don't have the interruptions.
Is that good? Anybody else? All right, here's an interesting one. Neither of our parents taught us a biblical and godly view of sex, so we have a lot of wrong habits of this, which naturally is shaping our lives in the area of sex. While we're working on overcoming these obstacles, we're struggling with applying the good and biblical understanding of sex. Looking for general ideas, how do you deal with this? And you touched a little bit about it earlier when you talked about sometimes our parents didn't teach us well in a lot of areas.
I talked a little bit about this in the ladies' session. I would say if you're the person that wrote that, or you wish you would have wrote that, come see me after, because I want to get your email address so that I can send you something that we talk about in premarital that's explicitly helpful in those areas. And I would just say, there's so many good resources, but like I said in the class, you can't just walk into a Christian Family bookstore and pull something off the shelf on marriage, because there's garbage in with the good. So ask if what you're reading and the resources that you're using to work through those hard questions, ask if they're good, so that you're getting good material to help change your thinking in those areas.
Logbos?
Any other takers on that one? Don't feel the pressure.
I think one thing, this would apply to other areas too, but we spent a lot of time in Ephesians 5 last night, and that is such a helpful model and paradigm in many ways, informs all aspects of marriage, including sex. And to say, what would it look like? Asking yourself and asking your spouse, what does it look like to live out sacrificial love, affection? What does it look like to live that out in this area? That would apply to most anything. But to get specific in application in those different areas has helped me, helped us.
I think sometimes there's an assumption sometimes with husbands, with wives, that sex is what married couples do, so what's the problem? And not recognizing either one, there maybe are some challenges that spouse is bringing to the marriage bed that might cause some hindrances, previous experiences or even traumatic experiences, the shame, the guilt, the fear that comes with that, or maybe no previous experiences but an amount of insecurity. And so there is a challenge to be in seemingly the most vulnerable moment you can possibly put yourself before the spouse, and expect it to be easy and natural and fun and relaxed, and that's not oftentimes the case, let alone just that own couple's chemistry, what was going on before they went into that moment. So a great amount of gentleness and patience and communication. What can I do that will help you relax? What can I do to show you that I love you, that I care about you, in such a way that just shows like the grand apex of marriage is not sex, though it's completely wonderfully intimate and transparent. It's not sex. You're not defined by that. But how can we enjoy that gift that maybe we otherwise could not if we had not interacted in a real loving way?
And I think the good news is whatever it is that your parents, maybe it was broken, you can stop the cycle by God's grace and move forward, which is great. All right. How do you balance boundaries with parents and in-laws while not straining relationships? i.e., boundaries, we are referring to things like unsolicited, hurtful discussions of family planning. I knew an in-law one would come up at some point.
Lug bills, flat. Yeah, so here's how this is working. In humility, no one's going to go unless you call on them. So you got to call on them.
I will. All right. Well, let's start with those who may have been in-laws for the longest period of time. Joe and Judy, how have you worked to stay involved in your children's and grandchildren's lives, but not being everyone loves Raymond's mother across the street?
We made a commitment a long time ago that when our kids left the home, we had to have an adult relationship with them. Mm-hmm. And when they got married, that became doubled. And so we became committed to the notion that we were available to give advice if asked, but not to give advice that we wouldn't give to someone who wasn't, we wouldn't give it unless it was an adult to an adult situation. So consequently, we've been very careful, if I've understood the question correctly, we've been very careful to not go to our kids' home unless we're invited, as a general rule. We just didn't show up. Not talk to them about the way they're doing a terrible job disciplining the kids. And always try to speak highly of the other set of grandparents. And that sometimes is difficult. And I'm sure they think the same thing about us. But we just tried to work hard at allowing them to have differences in their family than they grew up with, and hopefully they were developing their own traditions apart from the in-laws or us. And we were willing to respect that. Now, when you said family planning, I assume you don't mean vacations?
Apparently, I'm going to read a little more into this, yeah.
Okay, I missed your whole question then, didn't I?
Well, no, actually, you gave some great advice, I think. Well, as a grandparent, or you're wanting to be a grandparent, I think you need to be careful that you're not throwing these hints about when you're going to have kids, da-da-da-da-da, or when you're going to stop, for crying out loud. You got 18. So that's, I think, part of it. But maybe I can give a horrible example, and it's not one of my proudest moments, but it was very effective. We were at my in-laws. My mother-in-law has a very strong personality, and I'm a pushover, as you know. And I was going to discipline Annie, and she said, "Quick, run to Grandma, I'll protect you." To which I didn't even think. You need to filter sometimes. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "If you ever want to see your granddaughter again, don't ever do that or interrupt us while we're disciplining." Now, it worked, but don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. What you may want to do is just have a nice, graceful conversation at some point, explaining where you're feeling like you're getting butted into. So, seasoned with grace, not how I did it. But she never interrupted discipline again. And everybody in the room went, you know. So, examples of how you've done it a good way to get parents out of things?
The only thing I would add is I didn't understand what being a mother-in-law would feel like until I had my boys. And so I've been watching and studying all the different dynamics. And I would say now, speaking back to my old, younger self, you do have to cut your parents a little bit of slack and your in-laws because they really do love you. They're not doing it just to be a pain, most of them, but they really do love you. So graciousness, even if it rubs you the wrong way, is always a good way to fix that.
Lug bills.
And we're still working through some of those issues, and I'm sure we will be for a while. I think what was helpful for us was to, first of all, just recognize it's biblical, right there in Genesis 2. A man will leave father and mother, and they will be united to one another. So the whole idea of leaving and cleaving. So we're not wrong to feel that there's a priority of decision-making. There's a priority of, there's an ownership of our family that doesn't belong to those outside who are very interested and very quick to, and eager to speak into it. So, in practical ways, that just meant us realizing, hey, we own this responsibility of what decisions we make as a family. So then we receive that input not as threatening, because it's somebody who loves us and we're happy to get that input. But that doesn't make the decision for us, and we don't have to feel like we've done something wrong if we decide, actually, we're going to go a different route. So that freed us up, and I think along with that, just deciding, we had really good conversations the first couple of years. We were saying, we're a team, we're a unit. We're not against those other teams, but there are other teams. We used to be on the same team, but we did not want to do what we started to do, which was I would defend my family, she would defend her family, and then we're just pitted against one another. But say, no, we're our own family unit. Whenever we have the opportunity to even defend the other in-laws or to support them, and to say we're together and we want to honor them, but first and foremost, we need to be together.
Good answer. All right, let's see. Eric, we haven't heard a lot from you. I'll give you a softball one, and then we'll come down the line. How do you balance husband work or wife work, children, friends, and walk with God? What does it look like? I mean, it's easy to say you balance it, but what does it practically look like?
Well, I love all of those things that God's given me to enjoy. I love ministry. I love marriage. I love raising sons. I love interests like working out. I love friendships. So I would just say I just take the time that God has given me each and every day to invest in those things, and that when I'm in them, I'm fully invested in them. So specifically, like when I'm in ministry mode, I'm engaged in that. I'm thinking about that. And when I come home, and I'm often transitioning home, it's not uncommon I'll be praying for God to help me transition now and to give him my time and my attention to my wife, thinking through how I will give her my energy and effort. We will often text each other before I've arrived home, kind of like, what's the plan tonight? So we're on the same page, both what the night's going to look like. I might even text, hey, here's a couple topics we need to discuss that with our kids, some things that we need to kind of be on the same page about with them, interacting with our children. I will then usually sometimes put on my schedule time that she are going to have after the kids are in bed, and a couple of topics I want to talk about with her. They're not necessarily big topics, just things I want to make sure that we cover. So I would say the things that I don't do a lot of, that I think eat away at that, I don't watch TV, and I don't really track sports. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, either one of those things, but those are things that are really competing for my time. Like I do ministry, I do marriage, I do parenting, and then I choose to work out in the morning before they even wake up, so it doesn't come at the expense of my own family.
Jess, since it did say how do you balance husband work and whatnot, and you've got a quiver full.
It's hard, but I think for us, and the Bancrofts really discipled us in this when we first moved here, was to just use your calendar as a helpful tool. And we pretty religiously set aside in every calendar week 3 evenings where we have dinner together at home and we're putting the kids to bed. Now we may occasionally have something after they go to bed where people are coming over or whatever, but just making sure that we're setting aside 3 nights a week where we have our regular family routine and time together. That's been really helpful for us, just a practical, concrete thing that we've been able to do that helps us keep that balance. Another thing, and this does not just apply, I don't think, to a pastor's family, but let your family life revolve around the church, not the school, not this extended family. I guess we don't have family here, but that would probably be another one. That's something that we've just seen our kids love, that their church family and their church body, and this is where they feel at home, and we love that. So that's just another thing to keep in mind.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Judy.
You just have to keep your priorities straight. What are your priorities, and how are you living your life according to your priorities? And that takes intentional planning and time, which we fight with.
All right. And we as a congregation can help our pastors to be able to be better users of their time. We all have crises. I get that. But there are times to where maybe the next morning we can communicate with the pastors versus 11 o'clock at night. Now, there are the emergencies, but we can help protect them as well, because I grew up in ministry, and you want to make sure you're protecting your family. It's not a free-for-all. So that wasn't paid to say that, but we as a church need to hedge around our staff, our pastors, their families, so that we can help them to make sure they're using their time wisely, because they can get really busy. Okay, this one, Joe, this is coming to you. Please address the adjustment problems of marriage in the over 65 crowd. Sorry, I wasn't. Coping with health issues, getting along well under the same roof 24/7, keeping romance in marriage, how to encourage each other. Now, I'm not trying to profile, but we'll start with you guys, just in.
It's a big adjustment when they come home into your territory. And it's only been 2 years ago since Joe retired, but I bet it took me the first year to stop mumbling to myself or going into the bedroom and shutting the door and trying to get my mind right with God. And I kept saying to my friends, I am just sinning more than I've ever sinned before. So it's a selfish issue. And of course, he has no idea. It's a selfish issue. You have to share again. So it's an adjustment. You just have to get with God and say, this is my problem. I need help, and figure out how you're going to work it out. If you would have just gone to the basement, it would have been easier.
Note to self, build a man cave before retirement.
I have no response. I mean, she just admitted that she's a sinner, so that's fine with me. Just a couple of things. When you're older, and I found out today that I'm not the oldest person in the room, so that's encouraging. But things do change. They change in a lot of ways. They change physically. It's no fun to have your wheels fall off all the time, and you can't do things you used to do. You change mentally. I mean, I used to be able to think of scripture passages, boom, 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 like that. Q&As were great. I've lost that sharpness. There's just lots of changes, and it's part of God's plan for getting old, dying. But it also has something to do with the sin nature, but that's a different subject. But I think it's more important to realize that I have the same responsibilities. I am to live Christianly in my life now just as it was when I was 30 years old. I don't get any passes because I'm old. And that's something that I have to always remind myself. And I think at every season of life, God's requirements are baseline the same. And godliness is still godliness. Sin is still sin, no matter what station in life you find yourself. Yeah.
A lot of us aren't quite to that age. A couple of thoughts or ideas that we could be at least thinking about or could prepare better for. We hear the funny stories afterwards, but any pearls of wisdom there?
No pearls of wisdom except to say, establish patterns when you're young. Establish godly habits when you're young. They're harder to establish the older you get. And so begin thinking now about what some of the challenges might be then and work on them now rather than when they come. If you just did that, I think it'd be a great help.
Great. Eric, I'm going to come back to you because this is really elaborating a little bit on what you've talked about. In light of the nice guy syndrome, what does making decisions look like in the small things, especially in light of what you said in the Radical Unity section last night?
Yeah, so I was talking to a couple of you earlier this morning on this, just to clarify, because you had some good follow-up questions. I think decision-making is an opportunity for leadership and humility and deference as an expression of humility, thinking about what's more important than yourself. So the question is, how do you know which one it is, and how do you determine that? I think part of the challenge is to recognize that to not make a decision is making a decision. So the question is whether or not you're recognizing what's motivating that desire to withhold your contribution to the decision-making process. So whether it's a real small passing moment like, hey, today, like, where do you want to go for lunch? There's a question that has to be considered, a decision that has to be made. Home, out, if so, where out, that kind of thing. And I think there are times by which when that conversation started, a person defers to the other and says, I really don't have a strong preference either way. I really just want to be with you, and I'm glad to defer to what you enjoy. But the other person in that decision-making process might say, that's not helpful to me, because now you're kind of putting the burden on thinking through where we're going to go, and then the decision that I might make for that you might not like, but then I only learn after I've made the decision that you didn't like it, so I wish to be avoiding that moment, so could you instead give me 3 options of what you might like, so that when I make the decision, I'm confident the decision I made is something that you like as well. Let's be honest, we've all had these moments of thought. And so there's this complex web of am I not making a decision, or am I making a decision? If I don't make a decision, what's motivating that? Is that humility, or is that selfishness? Is that laziness? Or is that sort of sweet-spirited humility, thinking of others more important than myself? I find that wives, surprisingly, husbands, like it when their husbands involve themselves in the process. That maybe doesn't have to always be the final decision maker, but can help at least bear the process of how we're going to come to a decision, and the information being assessed and assimilated within kind of ordering of here are options. And then saying, whatever is decided, if I do defer to you, I then won't establish a pattern of coming back to you later well, you decided, which is now just saying, hey, I'm not responsible for the decision made, you are, and so it's kind of your fault. So it's a complex kind of process which you have to work out, and it's even seen in something small like where you're going to have lunch today. To what about our kids in college, to career, to should we buy a house, to any number of things, church you're going to go to. Douglas Wilson, in his book, Reforming Marriage, said, anytime a wife asks a husband for a decision, he should make the decision for her. And I used to champion that as the only right way to consider the subject. I think I've softened a bit on that. I think there's nuances to this and clarifications, but I do think there's a principle there that's sort of underwriting this decision, which is don't abstain from leadership opportunities if being asked of you, if that's exactly what's being asked of you.
Danelle and others, what is the biblical understanding of wives working outside the home?
Really? That's got to be mine? Why can't that be Judy's?
Well, there's one on sex here, too. I'm serious. Which one do you want?
That's a loaded question.
You got to summarize it.
All right. It is not a sin to work outside of the home. The Bible talks about women doing other things aside from just what they're doing in the home. I think a good way to gauge whether it's wise or not, that's different than sin or not, is your motives. I have literally had women tell me, I'm going back to work because I just can't handle being in the house with my kids all day. Okay, well, that might not be a great motive. Maybe your husband is not picking up his responsibilities, and so therefore he is pushing you into having to do that. That's another whole issue. I think motives comes down to how you determine whether it's wise or not to work. Like we talked about over in the other room, if you have a job responsibility and you're fulfilling all of those responsibilities and you have extra energy left over to work, part-time, something, go for it. If you're doing all of the things that the Bible is telling you are your first priorities, maybe you're super energetic. If you're a woman in the form of this guy, I guarantee you he would be a housewife with a little Etsy something going on.
What's happening right now?
My mind just went sideways on that one.
He'd be blowing up Pinterest. Oh, I got a new idea. But if you're not, it's not fair to your family or your kids or your husbands. Let's be honest, when you work all day and you get home and intimacy is, put on the table, you're like, I'm just too tired. Sorry. So if you're finding yourself giving your leftovers to your kids or your husband or whatever, yeah, then you might want to examine your motives. There's so much more that can be said on that, but I'll stop there.
fact, if you asked that question, it would be great to seek out
Yes.
somebody and get some more details on. Yeah, that's really a trap. And Judy, I don't know, did you work outside the home during the ministry, or were you in the home? And explain a little bit maybe of why you chose that.
We were in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. So when Joe was in seminary, I taught school after I graduated till he got out of seminary. And then we were ready to have children, and I was ready to be home. So I don't have any other experience with that. And I have to say, I am so thankful that I was able to do that.
Jess, did you want to comment on that at all?
Well, I would just say, so when Nathan was in seminary, I had 2 kids, and I was working half-time from home, and it was crazy. For me, I know everybody has different thresholds. Maybe some of you would be like, oh, big piece of cake. It wasn't for me. But Nathan did a great job, even during that season, of helping me know that that burden was not on my shoulders. He would say, just say the word, and you can be done. And I will work, and we'll slow down seminary. But in my mind, it was like, okay, either I survive this for another, this long, or I'm not going to see my husband. So it was kind of for us like, okay, let's weigh these pros and cons and try to come to a conclusion that, we feel like is wise for our family. But that said, I was very thankful to finally be able to be done working and be at home. But I think especially for those difficult seasons, it just really is a case-by-case basis. But I loved the way he just shouldered that responsibility for me. Emotionally, it relieved that pressure, so I didn't feel like I had to do it. It was something that I was choosing to do, to serve my husband.
Any others want to grab hold of that one? They're all looking at me like, go to the next one, please. All right. When as a man you meet with another man for accountability, at what point is it wise to discuss with your wife the details of the accountability discussion? There's 2 questions. 1, in respect to your purity and fight against sin and struggles, and number 2, also with respect to anyone else's purity and fight against sexual sin and struggles. Any takers on that one before I call on you?
You guys getting it.
Those 2, they've heard enough from me.
Nathan? Joe?
Nathan and Joe.
It's kind of a loaded question, really.
Yeah, you're asking on the person, which side of the accountability thing you're talking about?
Well, what I understand here, so I've been in accountability with somebody else helping me with struggles. At what point do I bring, or is there a point I bring my wife into this?
Like you and I talking, I've shared my challenges. At what point, if there is a point, I start to tell Danelle about the things that we're talking about that I've been struggling with?
Okay, if you're sharing your struggles with me, under no circumstances do I ever share any of those
Right.
with her. I know that there's arguments about the one flesh, but I feel pretty strongly about that. If the question is, when do you share with your wife? I really think it depends on the situation. I am not one who believes that oneness in marriage means that we open up our closets and share all of the skeletons with each other in the closets. So if my sharing my struggles with my wife is just a tool to make her feel guilty, then you don't do it. If I'm sharing my struggles with my wife because I sense that she's part of the solution to the problem, then maybe I would do it. If I believe that my struggles are characterized as sin against her, I must share it with her in order to seek her forgiveness. But if it's not sin against her, I don't think there is a necessary, compelling reason that I need to, per se, share with her. And then you got to talk about dispositions. How is she going to handle that? Is it going to make your relationship better or worse? And what is it that you're struggling with too makes a difference. So all of that is to say I didn't give you an answer, but yeah.
You were a pastor, weren't you? No, I think that was good. Nathan, do you want to add anything to that?
I just asked Joe. So, to follow up from that, if sinning against a wife, so particularly, I wasn't in the last session, I was in childcare, thinking of issues of purity, struggles there. Would you say then categorically those sins in that arena for a married man are sins against his wife that need to be at some level, at some point shared and confessed?
No, I don't think so. They are sins that I have against God. Could they be violations of my covenant relationship with my wife? Yes. But I don't think per se they are.
But if
I
an
believe that
affair or an emotional attachment, that's a whole different story.
Okay, I thought
I
your
would
question
assume.
was more.
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're
Yeah.
just
Yes.
saying the what ifs.
Yes. Yeah, I think then we're in a different ball game then. Yeah, and I don't think I've ever recommended any man who's been engaged in an affair not to clear the air with his wife. Because he has sinned against her, in my estimation, when that has happened. Now, one could argue that lustful thinking is the same thing, but be prepared then to seek her forgiveness and confess to her on a daily basis.
Anything to add down here? Okay. All right, we got time for a few more. Is there an explanation for why a husband or a wife isn't interested in sex? I can only assume it's me. What do we do? How do we open the conversation? I think we did touch on that a little bit in the breakouts. Don't know if you want to be contact or however you want to do it, but I wanted to be fair with the question. See what you wanted to do with it.
You want to comment on that first?
You first.
The question, not interested in sex, is it possible it's me? Yeah, I mean, possibility, yes. Probability, I can't say that. So you're kind of between those two spectrums. Is it possible it's you? I suppose it is possible, but you're going to have to ask. You're going to have to work to a level of communication where trust and transparency and willingness to share those reasons and explanations behind that decision is willing to be confided in you. The challenge is, as I said earlier, and I'll stop and ask you to comment more, the challenge is, part of it is the approach you take can be the simplest explanation as to why that's something that's not necessarily desired. Because sex can be an ultimate expression of selfishness for both sides. A woman, if she's interested in sex, can withhold sex, which is nothing more than her just rampant, repeated selfishness that she has towards her husband and love of herself. And you can't make me. And he can't. Otherwise, it'd be called rape. Can on the other side of the equation, though, because a husband's got a 1 Corinthians 7 proof text in his back pocket to pull out against his wife and say, you owe me. It's my body. Give it to me. And he's incredibly selfish and is using the Bible to mask his own selfish desires. Either one of those can be presuppositions that are explaining why the other person doesn't want to give themselves to the other. Now, at that point, it begins to deepen its well of possibilities as to why. Fears, insecurities, previous criminal, sinful acts, whatever that might be. And I would say, as the last point of contribution then to you, is the possibility of bringing others into that conversation, a woman talking to a woman, a man talking to a man, to have that conversation. I had shared in the man's talk that I had that this is a conversation. It's difficult because for sometimes a man wants to have sex and the wife does not. Sometimes the wife wants to have sex and the man does not. And it seems so unnatural, if it is a man doesn't want to have sex, it seems so unnatural for a man not to want to have sex with his wife, as she understands how men are wired, that she immediately thinks, it must be me. It must be me. Might not be you. Might be some other challenges he has. It could be an indication of a profound pornography addiction, where his mind has been so warped by a false view of sexuality that he has become so satisfied in the indulgence of that he no longer finds the normalcy of marital biblical sex intriguing and satisfying. Now, don't misunderstand me. Don't accuse your husband of that. I'm just saying that's a spectrum of possibility. What would you say?
We kind of talked about this next door, but if you can think about it, it's not just about intimacy if you come to the point and that's the hurdle you're needing to jump over. There's almost always unresolved conflict that just builds and builds and builds. And again, we're not here because we're perfect. The very example that he gave earlier about, waiting to see if the other one's going to forgive. Well, go ahead, you first. That same thing happens in intimacy. And we find that if a couple has had repeated, continual conflict for a long time, intimacy is at the bottom of the list, and you kind of have to start over. But the starting over means somebody has to go first. It's really hard and awkward and scheduled and, all of those things. So it's very complicated, but communication, hands down, is the only way that you're going to get through a problem like that. So you have to communicate. And if you can't communicate together without getting in an argument, seek somebody that does. Again, all the Christian women's books have the same contents because we all struggle with the same thing. So you're not going to tell me anything I don't already know, and or another friend that you ask. So just be bold and go to someone you trust and say, here's what we're dealing with, and speak into our lives. And then you get freedom, which is a wonderful feeling, instead of being trapped in misery.
Communication. There's certain things you feel like you don't talk about. You don't do in a church. Don't play cards. Don't dance. Don't talk about sex. And so you just kind of go through life thinking this is the norm. And that's why I appreciate weekends like this. Okay, one more. Almost came out perfect for the hour. And someone writes, any ideas as to why Christian marriages seem to fall prey to divorce at nearly the same ratio as non-Christian marriages? Does anybody want to volunteer before I choose you, or? We're not in the Army. Yes, thank you for your volunteering, Joe.
I just want to clarify the question. The question is based on a myth that's been repeated many times in Christian writing, that the statistics on Christian divorces are the same as the world. They're actually not. A study just came out by Lifeway that actually disproved this statistic and many other commonly referenced statistics. That's the good news. And maybe we'll find it this afternoon, link to it, so you can find it off that link and go, oh, okay, that's actually the accurate representation of the statistics. So just to kind of clear the deck a little bit on that. But the principle can still be applied as a point of question, which I'll defer to the panel on, which is, why do Christians divorce? Why did these things happen? If we have the Bible and the Scriptures and we profess, why did these things still take place?
Nathan, you go first.
I mean, maybe these are obvious. I think nominalism and worldliness. So nominalism in that there are a lot of people who claim the name of Christ, who maybe are even church-going, but who've not been reborn, who don't have a saving faith, trust in Jesus Christ. They've not repented of their sins. So they don't have the indwelling of the Spirit. They don't have all the resources they would need to fight for their marriage. And then I think amongst true Christians, worldliness. We're just too easily influenced by our culture's understanding of marriage, kind of a contractual view that I go into insofar as it's beneficial to me. And when it's no longer that, then I have every right to feel justified in quickly exiting. I would start there.
Two answers. The simple one is put two sinners in a room together and you got problems, and that doesn't change just because you're converted by God's wonderful grace. I think perhaps the more direct answer is that among Christians there is a horrible lack of the C word, commitment. There's no commitment to one another, but more than that, there seems to be a lack of commitment to marriage itself. And the result is predictable if that's the case.
All right, I'm not on the panel, but I've always believed that if divorce isn't an option, if that's not on the table, then anything that you go through, you're going to work out and not use the D word as the cop-out. And that's what Wendy and I decided early on, is divorce wasn't even on the table, so don't even bring it up. Murder, yes. Divorce, no. So, all right, let's thank our panel. I think they did a great job. Some of these were tough questions.
This has been a presentation of Castle View Baptist Church in Indianapolis, Indiana. For more information about our church or our senior pastor, Eric Bancroft, please click on the link below or visit castleview.org.